They laughed when I said I could save him, the low-paid technician whispered, her voice trembling in the sterile hospital suite. A black woman, once a brilliant doctor stripped of her license, stood invisible amidst the chaos of a billionaire's failing health. 20 elite physicians scrambled, their tests futile, while she, relegated to mopping floors, endured daily slights, dismissive glances, whispered doubts about her competence, and the sting of being called unfit for medicine because of her race and gender. Her sharp mind, honed by years of suppressed brilliance, spotted what they missed. Could her discovery shatter the walls of prejudice? Will one voice rise above the noise to change everything? Stay tuned to find out. Subscribe to our channel for the latest gripping stories and share in the comments where you're watching from. What clues do you think she'll uncover? The hospital suite gleamed like a five-star penthouse, its mahogany-paneled walls and soft ambient lighting masking the cold precision of medical machinery. Victor Blackwell, tech billionaire and titan of industry, lay in the center of this opulent fortress, his once commanding frame withered under crisp white sheets. Beeps from monitors punctuated the air, a relentless rhythm of decline. 20 of America's finest doctors, their credentials glittering with Ivy League pedigrees, hovered around him. They scribbled on charts, debated in hushed tones, and ordered tests that yielded nothing but frustration. Victor's eyes, dulled by illness, stared at the ceiling, unaware of the invisible figure moving silently at the room's edge. Angela Beaumont, a 38-year-old black woman, pushed a cleaning cart through the suite's doorway, her movements practiced and unobtrusive. 10 years ago, she had been a rising star in medicine, her mind alight with the intricacies of chemistry and diagnostics. A wrongful lawsuit, tainted by whispers of bias against her race and gender, had stripped her of her medical license, forcing her into this role as a low-level technician. The hospital, a gleaming monument to wealth and expertise, saw her only as a uniform, a shadow to be ignored. She wiped down surfaces, her hands steady despite the weight of a decade's worth of dismissal. The antiseptic scent mingled with the faint musk of expensive cologne, but something else lingered in the air, a metallic tang that prickled her senses. Dr. Thaddeus Reynolds, silver-haired and Harvard-educated, stood at the foot of Victor's bed, his voice low but commanding. "His liver function is deteriorating faster than our models predict," he told the team, his brow furrowed. "We've ruled out infectious causes, but the neurological symptoms are escalating. We need fresh perspectives. Exotic diseases, perhaps." The other doctors nodded, their faces etched with the strain of failure. Victor's wealth had bought him the best minds in medicine, yet his condition defied them all. Angela, polishing a stainless steel rail, listened closely, her mind cataloging their words. She had honed this skill in medical school, absorbing lectures while scribbling notes, before a car accident claimed her parents and left her to raise 3 siblings alone. Dreams of research labs had dissolved into night shifts and minimum wage. As she moved to the bathroom counter, Angela's eyes caught Victor's symptoms listed on a chart left carelessly open. Peripheral neuropathy, digestive distress, and unexplained fatigue. Her gaze drifted to his hands resting limply on the bed. The fingernails bore a faint yellow hue, a detail so subtle it could have been mistaken for poor lighting. She froze, her cloth hovering over the counter. Her mind still sharp from years of self-study through library books and online journals, raced, yellowing nails. She glanced at Victor's scalp, where patches of hair were missing, not randomly but in a distinct pattern. His gums, visible when he grimaced, showed a grayish tint. A memory from her toxicology lecture stirred, a rare poison, insidious and easily overlooked. "Thallium," she whispered to herself, the words slipping out before she could stop it. Her heart thudded. Could it be? The symptoms aligned too perfectly to be a coincidence. Thallium poisoning was rare, a relic of old spy novels, but its hallmarks were unmistakable to someone with her training. She straightened, her eyes scanning the room for anything out of place. On the bathroom counter sat an array of grooming products, each more luxurious than the last. A sleek black jar of hand cream caught her attention. Imported, exclusive, its label promising bespoke quality. Something about its placement felt deliberate, almost staged. Dr. Reynolds' voice cut through her thoughts. "Technician, "We need this room cleared for a private consultation," he said without looking at her, his tone clipped. Angela nodded, her face a mask of neutrality, though the dismissal stung like a familiar bruise. "Of course, doctor," she replied softly, pushing her cart toward the door. A nurse nearby muttered to another, "She used to be a doctor, you know. Didn't work out. Guess some people just don't have what it takes." The words, laced with a subtle sneer, hung in the air. Angela's jaw tightened, but she kept moving. She had heard variations of this for years, comments that questioned her competence, her place, her very existence in this space. Her skin, her gender, and her lack of a title made her an easy target. She paused at the doorway, glancing back at Victor. His condition was a puzzle, and she held a piece no one else seemed to see. The doctors' debates grew louder, their theories spiraling into increasingly complex territory. Autoimmune disorders, rare genetic mutations. Yet none mentioned poisoning, a possibility too simple, too arcane for their sophisticated diagnostics. Angela's mind churned. Thallium wasn't tested for in standard panels. It required specific suspicion. She thought of the hand cream again, its prominent placement nagging at her. Who brought it? Why was it always there, untouched by the staff? In the hallway, she leaned against her cart, her breath steadying. The hospital's luxury wing, reserved for the elite, was a world apart from the crowded wards she'd once trained in. Here, wealth bought privacy, discretion, and the illusion of control. Victor had demanded the best, and yet he was slipping away. Angela's eyes narrowed. She wasn't a doctor anymore, not in their eyes, but her mind refused to forget. She had spent years reading journals during lunch breaks, watching lectures on her phone while her children slept, keeping her knowledge alive despite the world's efforts to bury it. The injustice of her situation simmered beneath her calm exterior. 10 years ago, she'd been accused of negligence in a case where the real culprit was a hospital's systemic oversight. The lawsuit had been swift, the blame pinned on her, a black woman in a field where she was already an outlier. Colleagues who once praised her turned silent. Mentors looked away. She'd been sacrificed to protect the institution, her career reduced to ashes. Now she navigated this hospital as a ghost, her expertise dismissed as irrelevant. Yet as she watched the doctors flounder, she felt a spark of defiance. They might not see her, but she saw everything. She pushed her cart down the hall, the wheels squeaking faintly. The symptoms replayed in her mind. Yellow nails, patchy hair loss, gray gums. Thallium. It was a hypothesis, but it fit like a key in a lock. She needed more evidence, something tangible to bridge the gap between her invisible role and the truth. The doctors would never listen to a technician, not without proof. She thought of her children, Tasha, Marcus, and little Jamal, waiting at home, depending on her paycheck. Risking her job was a gamble, but letting a man die when she could help was unthinkable. As she reached the supply closet, Angela paused, her hand on the door. The hospital's fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows. She was used to working in the dark, unnoticed, but tonight felt different. The weight of what she'd seen pressed against her. Victor Blackwell's life hung in the balance, and the answer lay not in the minds of celebrated specialists, but in the observations of a woman they'd trained themselves to overlook. She closed her eyes, her resolve hardening. She would watch, wait, and find a way to make them hear her. The truth was there, hidden in plain sight, and she would not let it stay buried. Angela Beaumont's footsteps echoed faintly in the dimly lit hospital corridor, her cleaning cart a silent companion as she moved through the night shift. The luxury wing, with its polished floors and muted elegance, felt like a stage where she played an unseen role. Victor Blackwell's condition gnawed at her thoughts. The symptoms, yellowing nails, patchy hair loss, grayish gums, locked in her mind like a chemical formula waiting to be solved. Her hypothesis of thallium poisoning, born from years of dormant knowledge, pulsed with certainty, but certainty alone wasn't enough. She needed proof, something undeniable to pierce the veil of her invisibility. The sleek black jar of hand cream, its label boasting Swiss exclusivity, lingered in her memory. Its deliberate placement on Victor's counter felt like a clue, a thread begging to be pulled. She paused near a supply closet, her hands gripping the cart's handle. The hospital was quieter now, the bustle of daytime replaced by the hum of machines and the occasional murmur of nurses. Angela's mind raced, piecing together observations. The cream had appeared again today, brought by Jefferson Burke, Victor's former business rival turned solicitous friend. She'd seen him in the suite that afternoon, his tailored suit and polished demeanor a stark contrast to the sterile environment. Victor swears by this cream, Burke had said to a nurse, his voice smooth as he placed the jar prominently on the nightstand. It's the only thing that soothes his skin. The nurse had nodded, uninterested, but Angela's eyes had lingered. Something in Burke's insistence, the way his fingers lingered on the jar, felt rehearsed, almost performative. Her chemistry training kicked in, urging her to question the anomaly. Thallium, a heavy metal poison, was odorless, tasteless, and easily absorbed through the skin. A perfect weapon disguised in luxury. Could the cream be the delivery method? The thought sent a shiver down her spine. She needed to test it, but accessing a lab as a technician was a risk that could cost her job. Her children's faces, Tasha's curious eyes, Marcus's quiet trust, Jamal's infectious laugh, flashed in her mind. Losing her income would unravel their fragile stability, yet the weight of Victor's life pressed heavier. She couldn't ignore what she knew. Angela adjusted her schedule, swapping shifts to ensure she'd be in Victor's suite during the quiet hours. As she cleaned an adjacent room, she overheard two residents discussing his case. His symptoms are a mess, one said, flipping through a chart. Neuropathy's worse, and now there's abdominal pain. Reynolds thinks it's a rare syndrome. The other shook his head. Nothing fits. We're chasing ghosts. Angela's pulse quickened. The symptoms were no ghost. They were a pattern, one she recognized from toxicology texts studied under dim kitchen lights. She needed that cream sample, and she needed it tonight. At 2 a.m., the ward was a hush of shadows. Angela slipped into Victor's suite, her card a pretext for her presence. The billionaire slept fitfully, his breathing shallow, monitors casting a faint glow across his face. She moved to the bathroom, her hands steady as she wiped down surfaces. The black jar sat on the counter, its metallic sheen catching the light. She glanced at the door, ensuring no one was near, then slipped on gloves from her cart. With a small, sterile vial from the supply closet, she carefully scooped a tiny amount of the cream, her movements precise despite the tremor in her chest. The act felt like theft, a betrayal of the rules that kept her employed, but it was the only way. As she sealed the vial, footsteps approached. Her heart leapt. She shoved the vial into a hidden compartment in her cart, behind a stack of cleaning rags, and resumed wiping the counter. A security guard, his flashlight beam sweeping the room, paused at the doorway. "Everything all right in here?" he asked, his tone more bored than suspicious. Angela nodded, her face a mask of calm. "Just finishing up," she said, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. The guard lingered, his eyes scanning her uniform, her badge, her presence. "Don't take too long," he said, turning away. She exhaled, her hands trembling as she pushed the cart out. The vial, small but heavy with potential, felt like a ticking bomb. In the employee break room, Angela sat alone, the vial hidden in her pocket. She needed a lab, but the hospital's facilities were off limits to someone of her status. A memory surfaced. Her old college lab, where she'd once conducted experiments under a professor's watchful eye. She'd learned to improvise to make do with limited resources. Cleaning solutions, if combined correctly, could create a rudimentary test for thallium. It wouldn't be perfect, but it could confirm her suspicions. The risk was enormous. Getting caught in a lab could mean termination, or worse, accusations of tampering. Yet the alternative was watching Victor die while the doctors grasped at theories. The hospital's hierarchy loomed over her, its biases woven into every interaction. Earlier that day, as she'd passed the nurse's station, a doctor had glanced at her badge and said to a colleague, "She's in the wrong place. Techs don't belong near the labs." The words, casual but cutting, echoed the lawsuit that had ended her career. Back then, a patient's death had been pinned on her, despite evidence pointing to a senior physician's error. Her race and gender had made her an easy scapegoat, her protests drowned out by a system that valued credentials over truth. Now as she sat in the break room, the sting of that memory fueled her resolve. She wouldn't let another injustice pass, not when she could act. Angela slipped into the lab wing after hours, her badge granting just enough access to avoid suspicion. The lab was a maze of equipment, its sterile silence a stark contrast to the chaos of her thoughts. She found a corner workstation, dimly lit, and gathered supplies. Basic reagents, a beaker, a burner. Her hands moved with the precision of her student days, mixing a solution to test for thallium's telltale reaction. The cream, smeared into a small dish, reacted faintly, a color change so subtle it required her trained eye to confirm. Her breath caught. Thallium. The evidence was real, but it was fragile, inadmissible without official testing. She needed to get it to someone who would listen. As she cleaned up, a voice startled her. "What are you doing here?" A young nurse, Sarah, stood at the door, her expression a mix of curiosity and disapproval. Angela's heart raced, but she kept her voice calm. "Just checking supplies," she lied, slipping the vial back into her pocket. Sarah's eyes narrowed. "This isn't your area. Stick to your job, okay?" The words carried a familiar edge, a reminder of Angela's place in the hospital's pecking order. She nodded, pushing past Sarah, her mind already racing to the next step. She had to speak up, but who would hear her? Back in the break room, Angela approached Sarah again, her resolve outweighing her fear. "I think Mr. Blackwell's being poisoned," she said quietly, holding up a printout of thallium symptoms she'd found online. Sarah's face hardened. "You're a technician, not a doctor. Leave this to the professionals." The dismissal was a slap, but Angela pressed on. "Just look at the symptoms. They match perfectly." Sarah sighed, glancing at the paper before handing it back. "You're out of your depth. Don't make trouble." Angela stepped back, the weight of rejection settling on her shoulders. She was alone in this, but the evidence in her pocket burned with urgency. As dawn broke, Angela stood in the employee bathroom, staring at her reflection. Her uniform, practical and forgettable, hid the scientist within. She thought of Burke's visits, his insistence on the cream, the way he lingered near Victor. The pattern was clear, but proving it would mean crossing a line she couldn't uncross. She tucked the vial deeper into her pocket, her decision made. Victor's life hung in the balance, and she would find a way to make the truth heard, even if it cost her everything. The hospital's luxury wing trembled with urgency as alarms shattered the pre-dawn silence. Victor Blackwell's suite, a fortress of wealth and desperation, erupted into chaos. Monitors screamed, their shrill beeps signaling a plummeting heart rate and a liver on the brink of collapse. Nurses rushed in, their faces taut with panic, while 20 of America's top doctors converged, their voices overlapping in a cacophony of medical jargon. Angela Beaumont stood frozen in the hallway, her cleaning cart abandoned, the vial of tainted hand cream burning in her pocket. She'd known this moment was coming. Victor's symptoms had been screaming thallium poisoning for days, but the speed of his decline stole her breath. Her evidence, meticulously gathered in the dead of night, was her only weapon, but presenting it meant stepping into a firestorm of skepticism and scorn. Inside the suite, Dr. Thaddeus Reynolds took command, his silver hair glinting under the fluorescent lights. "Stabilize his vitals," he barked, his hands steady as he reviewed the latest readings. "Liver enzymes are critical. Kidneys failing. We need a full panel now." The team scrambled, their movements a blur of efficiency, but their faces betrayed a grim truth. They were losing him. Angela edged closer, her heart pounding, drawn by the gravity of the crisis. She clutched the printout of thallium symptoms, its edges creased from hours of study. The room was a pressure cooker, and she was an outsider, her technician's badge a barrier no one would cross. Yet the truth in her pocket demanded to be heard. She slipped into the suite's anteroom, blending into the shadows as she'd done for years. Her eyes scanned Victor's chart, propped on a counter amid the chaos. Worsening neuropathy, acute abdominal pain, erratic vitals. Each line confirmed her diagnosis, but the doctor's focus remained on exotic syndromes and genetic anomalies, blind to the poison coursing through his veins. Angela's mind raced. She'd tried warning Sarah, the nurse, only to be dismissed as an overreaching technician. The memory of that rejection stung, but it paled against the stakes now. Victor's life hung by a thread, and her silence would be complicity. The suite's door swung open, and Jefferson Burke entered, his polished demeanor jarring against the frantic scene. "How's Victor?" he asked, his voice smooth but edged with something Angela couldn't place. Concern or calculation? Dr. Reynolds barely glanced at him. "Critical. We're doing everything we can." Burke nodded, setting a new jar of hand cream on the nightstand with deliberate care. "He'll want this when he wakes," he said, his fingers lingering on the jar. Angela's stomach twisted. That cream, her tests had shown, was laced with thallium, a slow, insidious killer. Burke's insistence on its use was no coincidence. It was a script, and he was its author. Angela's resolve hardened. She couldn't wait for permission, not when every second pushed Victor closer to death. The conference room, adjacent to the suite, was packed with doctors, their debate a storm of theories and egos. Dr. Reynolds stood at the center, his voice cutting through the noise. "We've tested for everything. Autoimmune, infectious, metabolic. Nothing fits. We need to consider experimental treatments." The room buzzed with agreement, but Angela saw the futility in their words. They were chasing shadows while the truth sat in plain sight. She took a breath, her heart a drumbeat in her chest, and stepped into the room. 20 pairs of eyes turned, their surprise morphing into disdain. Dr. Reynolds' gaze was icy. "Technician, this is a closed meeting," he said, his tone a blade. Angela stood her ground, her voice steady despite the tremor in her hands. "Mr. Blackwell is being poisoned with thallium," she said, holding up her printout and the vial. "The symptoms, neuropathy, hair loss, abdominal pain, match perfectly. I tested the hand cream. It's the delivery method." The room erupted in laughter, a harsh, dismissive wave that crashed over her. A doctor in the back muttered, "She's delusional. A tech playing doctor?" Angela's cheeks burned, but she pressed on, her voice rising with scientific precision. "Thallium is absorbed through the skin. It's odorless, tasteless, and missed by standard panels unless you look for it. The cream's been tampered with. Check the visitor logs. Burke's been bringing it daily." The laughter faded, replaced by uneasy glances. Dr. Reynolds' face darkened. "You're out of line," he snapped. "This is a medical matter, not a janitor's hunch." The word janitor landed like a slap, its sting sharpened by the room's silent agreement. Angela's years of dismissal, her race, her gender, her fall from doctor to technician, echoed in that moment, but she refused to flinch. Dr. Park, a younger physician with tired eyes, broke the tension. "What if she's right?" he asked quietly, stepping forward. The room stilled, his words a crack in the wall of skepticism. "The symptoms do align with heavy metal poisoning. It's worth a test." His colleagues stared, some with scorn, others with reluctant curiosity. Dr. Reynolds scoffed. "We ran a heavy metals panel weeks ago. It was negative." Angela shook her head. "Standard panels miss low dose, chronic exposure. You need a specific thallium assay, hair samples, blood, the cream itself." Her knowledge, drawn from years of self-study, silenced the room for a moment. Dr. Park nodded. "Run it," he said to a resident, his voice firm. "Get samples now. Blood, hair, and that cream." The resident hesitated, glancing at Dr. Reynolds, who gave a curt nod, his jaw tight. Angela handed over the vial, her fingers trembling, but her gaze steady. The room's energy shifted, the air thick with doubt and possibility. As the resident rushed out, Dr. Reynolds turned to Angela, his eyes narrowing. "If this is a waste of time, you'll answer for it," he said. The threat hung heavy, a reminder of her precarious place in this world. She nodded, her silence a shield against his disdain. The weight was agonizing. Angela stood in the corner, ignored once more as the doctors resumed their debate. Whispers reached her ears. "She's got nerve," one said, "but no credentials." Another, "Probably just wants attention." The words, laced with the subtle venom of prejudice, were familiar. 10 years ago, a lawsuit had painted her as incompetent, her blackness and womanhood weaponized against her. Now, as she stood in this room, her expertise reduced to a hunch, the same biases threatened to bury her again. But she held fast, her mind anchored by the science she'd never abandoned. The resident returned, his face pale. "Preliminary results," he said, holding up a tablet. "Thallium in the cream, trace amounts, but consistent. Blood and hair samples are being processed, but the levels suggest chronic exposure." The room froze, the doctor's faces a mix of shock and disbelief. Dr. Reynolds stared at the tablet, his authority shaken. Angela's heart surged, vindication warring with fear. She'd been right, but at what cost? Burke, still in the suite, was escorted out by security, his protests drowned by the weight of the evidence. "I was just helping," he insisted, but his voice cracked, betraying him. Angela stepped back, her role in the crisis complete for now. The doctors scrambled to adjust their approach, ordering a specific antidote, Prussian blue, to counter the poison. Victor's monitors steadied slightly, a flicker of hope in their readings. Angela's eyes met Dr. Park's, and he gave a small nod, a gesture of respect that felt monumental in its rarity. The room's laughter had died, replaced by a tense acknowledgement of her truth. But the victory was fragile. She knew the system that had dismissed her wouldn't change overnight. As she left the conference room, her vial now in the hands of those who could act, she felt the weight of her gamble. She'd crossed a line, risked everything, and the truth was finally in motion. The hospital suite, once a battlefield of desperation, now held a fragile stillness. Victor Blackwell's monitors beeped steadily, the rhythm of life clawing its way back. The Prussian blue antidote, administered in the wake of Angela Beaumont's revelation, had begun its work, pulling thallium from his system like a thief in retreat. Doctors moved with cautious purpose, their voices hushed, as if speaking too loudly might unravel the miracle unfolding. Angela stood at the room's edge, her technician's uniform a stark contrast to the white coats around her. The air carried a new weight, not of crisis, but of reckoning. Her truth, once mocked, had shifted the room's gravity, and for the first time eyes that had always looked through her now lingered. Victor stirred, his gaze weak but lucid, finding Angela in the corner. His hand, frail but deliberate, reached toward her. "You saved me," he whispered, his voice a rasp that silenced the room. The words hung heavy, a declaration that pierced the invisible barrier Angela had lived behind for a decade. Dr. Thaddeus Reynolds, standing by the bed, froze, his usual authority softened by the moment. He cleared his throat, his eyes flickering to Angela. "We missed it," he admitted, his voice low, almost confessional. "All of us." The admission, though reluctant, was a crack in the fortress of his pride, and it echoed through the suite. One by one, the doctors turned to Angela, their faces a mix of awe and discomfort. Then Dr. Park, the young physician who had dared to listen, began to clap. The sound grew, a slow wave that filled the space, a tribute not just to her act, but to the shattering of a long-held hierarchy. Angela's chest tightened, not with pride, but with a quiet vindication. She'd spent years as a shadow, her brilliance buried under a wrongful lawsuit that had weaponized her blackness and womanhood. The hospital, with its gleaming corridors and unspoken rules, had reduced her to a role where her voice was irrelevant. Yet now, as the applause faded, she felt the weight of their acknowledgement. It wasn't gratitude alone. It was a reluctant admission that her mind, dismissed for so long, had seen what theirs could not. She nodded slightly, her face composed, but inside a storm of emotions churned. Relief for Victor, fear of what her actions might cost, and a spark of hope that this moment might change something deeper. As the doctors dispersed to monitor Victor's recovery, Angela slipped out, her shift technically over, but her mind still tethered to the suite. In the hallway, a nurse she'd known for years, Clara, caught her arm. "You did that," Clara said, her eyes wide with something like pride. "They're talking about you now, Angela. Really talking." The words were kind, but they carried a subtle edge, a reminder that her visibility was new, untested, and fragile. Angela offered a small smile. "I just did what I had to," she said, her voice steady despite the weight of the day. Clara nodded, but her glance lingered, as if seeing Angela for the first time. At home, Angela stepped into the small apartment she shared with her children. The familiar chaos of their lives, textbooks strewn across the kitchen table, dishes waiting in the sink, grounded her. Tasha, her 14-year-old daughter, looked up from her homework, her eyes sharp with intuition. "Mom, what happened? You look different." Angela hesitated, the weight of the hospital's events still settling. She sat beside Tasha, the worn couch creaking under her. "I helped someone today," she said, her voice soft but firm. "Someone important." And they listened. Tasha's face lit up, a rare grin breaking through her teenage reserve. "You saved him, didn't you? Like a superhero?" Angela laughed, a sound that felt foreign after the tension of the night. "Not a superhero, just me." Tasha leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. "I want to be like you, Mom. Smart like that." The words pierced Angela, a reminder of why she'd fought so hard to keep her mind sharp despite the world's efforts to dull it. She tucked Tasha into bed, her daughter's words echoing in her mind. The hospital's applause had been a moment, but moments could fade. She thought of the lawsuit a decade ago, how quickly her colleagues had turned away when her race and gender made her an easy target. The memory fueled her caution. She knew better than to trust a single victory to rewrite the rules. Back in the kitchen, she sipped lukewarm coffee, staring at the pile of bills on the counter. Her job as a technician was her lifeline, and risking it for Victor had been a gamble. But Tasha's words, her pride, made it worth it. The next day, Angela returned to the hospital, her uniform of familiar armor. The air felt different. Nurses nodded as she passed, their smiles tentative but real. Dr. Park approached her in the hallway, a paper cup of coffee in his hand. "Thought you might need this," he said, his voice warm. "You've been through a lot." The gesture, simple but deliberate, was a shift, a crack in the wall that had kept her invisible. "Thank you," Angela said, taking the cup, her fingers brushing the warmth of it. Park hesitated, then added, "What you did, it was brave and right." His words, unguarded, carried a weight that made her pause. For years, she'd been dismissed, her expertise reduced to a footnote. Now, one ally, however small, felt like a lifeline. But not everyone was ready to shift. In the break room, Angela overheard two doctors talking, their voices low but sharp. "She got lucky," one said, stirring his coffee. "Doesn't mean she belongs in our meetings." The other nodded. "Reynolds won't let this change anything. She's still just a tech." The words, though expected, cut deep, a reminder of the hospital's rigid hierarchy. Angela's race and gender, her lack of a title, were still lenses through which too many saw her. She straightened, pushing the sting aside. Their doubt couldn't erase what she'd done. Later in Victor's suite, she cleaned as usual, her movements automatic but her eyes alert. Victor, stronger now, sat up slightly, his gaze finding her. "Miss Beaumont," he said, his voice still weak but clear, "I owe you my life." Angela paused, her cloth hovering over a table. "I just saw what was there," she said quietly. Victor shook his head. "You saw what they didn't. That's enough for me." His words carried a promise, a hint of something more, an opportunity, perhaps, to reclaim the path stolen from her. He mentioned a fund, a way to support her, but the details were vague, a conversation for another day. For now, Angela nodded, her heart cautious but hopeful. As she left the suite, Dr. Reynolds approached, his posture stiff, his eyes avoiding hers. "Miss Beaumont," he said, the words clipped, "your observation was correct. We're adjusting treatment accordingly." It wasn't an apology, but it was close, a concession from a man unaccustomed to bending. Angela met his gaze, her voice steady. "I'm glad he's improving." Reynolds nodded, turning away, but the exchange lingered, a small victory in a world that rarely yielded. Angela walked to her car that evening, the hospital's lights glowing behind her. The applause, the nods, the coffee from Park. They were fragments of change, but change nonetheless. She'd broken through, not just for Victor, but for herself, for Tasha, for the possibility of a future where her voice mattered. The road ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years she felt seen, her worth no longer buried in the shadows. 6 months had passed since the night Angela Beaumont's voice shattered the hospital's silence, and now she stood at a podium in a packed conference hall, the weight of 1,000 eyes upon her. The annual medical symposium, A gathering of the nation's top physicians buzzed with anticipation. Angela, no longer cloaked in a technician's uniform, wore a tailored blazer, her posture steady, but her heart racing. The stage lights cast her shadow, long and sharp, a stark contrast to the invisible figure she'd been for a decade. Her presentation, titled Observation Over Credentials, was a bold challenge to the room's entrenched hierarchies. Truth doesn't need a title, she began, her voice clear and unwavering. It needs eyes that see what others overlook. The audience, a sea of white coats, leaned forward, some with curiosity, others with skepticism, but none could look away. She spoke of patterns, of symptoms dismissed as noise, and of the power of knowledge honed in the shadows. Her words wove a narrative of science and resilience, grounded in the case that had changed everything: Victor Blackwell's survival. She didn't name him per his request, but the story was known, whispered in hospital corridors and medical journals. Angela's voice grew stronger as she described the diagnostic process, not as a technician, but as a scientist who'd never stopped learning. The room, filled with doctors who'd once walked past her without a glance, now hung on her every word. Among them sat Dr. Thaddeus Reynolds, his silver hair catching the light, his nod subtle but unmistakable, a silent acknowledgement of a world redefined. The hospital had begun to shift in the wake of her actions. Administrators, initially unsure how to handle her, had invited her to consult on complex cases, her insights now sought rather than ignored. A memo circulated, quietly revising protocols to encourage input from all staff, a change sparked by her victory. Yet Angela knew the system's roots ran deep. In meetings, some doctors still hesitated to meet her gaze, their discomfort a reminder of the biases that lingered. One, during a case discussion, had muttered, "She's not one of us," his voice low but audible. Angela had smiled tightly, her response sharp and scientific, silencing him without a word. Her presence, once invisible, was now a force, reshaping the space she occupied. At home, Angela's life was transforming. The kitchen table, once buried under bills and cleaning schedules, now held textbooks and college applications. Tasha, her 14-year-old daughter, had thrown herself into her studies, her grades soaring under the influence of her mother's example. "Mom, I want to be a doctor," Tasha said one evening, her eyes bright with determination. "Not just any doctor, like you." Angela's heart swelled, but she tempered her pride with caution. "It's a hard road," she warned, her voice soft, "but you're strong enough." Tasha hugged her, the embrace fierce, a silent vow to carry forward the legacy Angela was building. Marcus and Jamal, her younger children, watched with wide eyes, their mother no longer just a provider, but a hero whose story they'd tell for years. Victor Blackwell, now fully recovered, had kept his promise. His foundation, established in Angela's name, funded scholarships for underrepresented students in medicine, with Angela as its first recipient. The offer to return to medical school had come with a personal note from Victor. "You belong where your mind can soar." She'd accepted, her first classes looming, a return to a path stolen a decade ago. The transition wasn't without friction. Some hospital staff, entrenched in old ways, still whispered about her luck or audacity. A nurse passing her in the hall had remarked, "Not everyone gets a second chance like that." The words, laced with envy, echoed the lawsuit that had derailed her career when her race and gender made her an easy target. But Angela carried on, her focus on the future, not the grudges of the past. In the hospital, her role defied definition. Her title remained technician, but doctors now sought her out, their questions framed with a new respect. During a consultation on a neurological case, Dr. Park, her unexpected ally, had pulled her aside. "Your perspective, it's different," he said, his voice earnest. "We need that." The words were a bridge, small but significant, across the divide that had once kept her silent. Yet she remained cautious, aware that respect was fragile in a world that still measured worth by titles and appearances. Her blackness, her womanhood, her history, they were lenses through which she was judged, but they were also her strength, sharpening her ability to see what others missed. One evening, after a long shift, Angela sat with Tasha at the kitchen table, helping with a biology assignment. The topic was cellular toxicity, and Tasha's questions mirrored the ones Angela had asked herself during Victor's crisis. "How do you know what to look for?" Tasha asked, her pencil hovering. Angela smiled, her voice steady. "You look where others don't. You listen to the quiet things." Tasha nodded, her eyes alight with understanding, and Angela saw her own journey reflected in her daughter's ambition. The moment was a legacy, not just of knowledge but of resilience, a reminder that worth existed beyond the world's narrow gaze. As Angela walked through the hospital the next day, she noticed a shift in the air. Nurses who once ignored her now offered nods. A resident asked her opinion on a chart, his tone devoid of condescension. The changes were small, but they were real, ripples from a stone she'd thrown into a stagnant system. She thought of the lawsuit, the years of dismissal, the nights spent studying by lamplight while her children slept. Each moment had shaped her, forging a perspective that no degree could teach. Her victory wasn't just saving Victor, it was proving that truth could rise from the margins, that a black woman, stripped of her title, could still reshape the world. In the hospital's lobby, a new plaque gleamed, funded by Victor's foundation. It bore a simple quote, "See what others miss." Angela paused before it, her reflection faint in the polished surface. The words were hers, spoken during her presentation, now etched as a testament to her impact. She didn't linger, but as she walked away, a young nurse approached, her voice hesitant. "I heard your talk," she said. "It made me think, maybe I can speak up too." Angela met her gaze, her smile warm but firm. "You can, and you should." The exchange, brief but electric, was a spark, a hint of the broader change her story might inspire. That night, Angela stood in her apartment, the city's lights flickering through the window. She thought of Tasha, of the foundation, of the plaque, of all the ways her life had shifted. The hospital's walls, once barriers, were beginning to crack. Not just for her, but for others who'd been overlooked. Her journey, born in the shadows, had become a beacon, a reminder that value didn't depend on titles or the world's approval. As she prepared for bed, Tasha's voice echoed in her mind, a promise of a future where her daughter and others like her would walk paths Angela had cleared. The legacy of truth, she knew, would outlast any applause, shining brightest in the lives it touched. Thank you for joining us on Angela Beaumont's incredible journey, a story of resilience, truth, and breaking barriers against all odds. We hope her courage and brilliance inspired you as much as they inspired us. What moved you most about her fight to be seen and heard? Did her story spark any thoughts about overcoming challenges in your own life? Share your reflections in the comments below. We'd love to hear your perspective and where you're tuning in from. Your thoughts help us create more stories that matter. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel for the latest narratives of underdogs rising through sheer determination. Hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Thank you for being part of our community, and we can't wait to bring you another powerful story soon. Until next time, keep looking for the truth in the shadows. See you in the next video.